I'm sure you've heard about designer babies, but this has gotten out of control.
They could take your hair follicle, genetically modify it into egg, for example, and someone could conceive a child using IVF.
Out of this whole traditional thing called love and nature.
This is highly morally problematic.
It's like going to a fortune teller and they predict your future, and then you base your life on that fortune teller's prediction. Technology is really something, but could it go too far? Now, I'm sure you've heard about designer babies, but this has gotten out of control, let me tell you what. But what if you could design a baby that had the most intelligence, the best looking, less health problems? Would you do it? Or would you have a nagging sensation in you that this is probably pretty wrong? Well, I want to dig in a little bit to the designer babies epidemic. So I want to talk to policy analyst for the Center for Technology and the Human Person, Emma Waters, who's going to break down all of my questions, and I have so many. Emma, thank you so much for being with me. This is incredibly confusing to the average person, so I'm so happy to have your expertise.
Absolutely, Tommy. Thanks for having me on today.
Oh, I have a lot of questions, and a lot of this is way over my head. Science is not my best subject, neither is math. So you're going to have to help me here. But I've heard about this, and, you know, on its face, it seems like kind of a simple concept, okay? People that do IVF, they have embryos, and they're able to use AI and other technologies to kind of survey the embryos and decide which one is the best, which one's going to have, you know, the least likelihood of having different diseases, or maybe would be, you know, have the best chance of whatever your heart desires. So I understand that on its face, but that's been around for, you know, a while now. People have been able to assess embryos. What makes this latest, I guess, rendition of all of this, including AI technology, worrisome from your perspective?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And you're absolutely right. So frankly, as long as IVF has been around since the 1980s, we've had something called pre-implantation genetic testing that allowed fertility clinics to assess for basic genetic outcomes like the sex of the embryo, monogenetic conditions like Down syndrome or Tay-Sachs disease or cystic fibrosis, what have you, and even look at things occasionally like the eye color of a child. And so in the United States, about 75% of all fertility clinics will offer that basic testing package. But what we've seen recently with the rise of Orchid and Nucleus Genomics and a number of other embryonic genetic screening companies is that they're diving deeper into the genetic makeup of the embryo. So using whole genome processing, they're actually able to look at not just basic monogenetic conditions, but polygenetic conditions that are far more complex. So it requires multiple genes to understand the outcome. So they're not only looking at things like the sex of the embryo, but they're actually analyzing the embryo and asking, is this embryo potentially going to be deaf? Is the embryo going to have an insulin resistance problem? Is it prone to obesity? Could this embryo actually develop Alzheimer's as the person ages over time? And so they're diving way deeper into the genetic makeup of an embryo than we've ever seen before. And on top of that, some of these companies are even claiming to screen for things like the IQ of a child, so how smart they'll be, or even the personality of the child. So if you want a child whose predisposition to niceness or aggression or compassion in their demeanor, what have you, some companies, such as Heliospect in particular, are promising that they can actually analyze the genes to help you choose the embryo that most aligns with your interests. And so this goes way beyond what we typically see in IVF, which is oftentimes a procedure for infertility, and is actually just a question of helping parents choose the exact kind of child that they want with or without infertility in the background.
Yeah, and you know, listen, I think when I hear it, it sounds shocking, and to me it sounds horrifying. I think all of this playing God stuff, for me personally, I don't love it. I don't love the whole concept. I think that there are people that need to do IVF because they have fertility issues, and I'm happy that that option is out there for them. But I think it's gone to such a degree where it goes beyond just being, you know, infertile and needing another way to conceive. And it's gone to, like you said, kind of trying to create this perfect child in a test tube. and it's not natural. And I think there are a lot of ethical concerns that go around with that. And you're telling me they can pick out like personality traits here. So you're telling me that the way that we're going to be, the way that we act, the way our personalities are, that kind of goes along with our genes, and they can identify different things that make us more prone to certain behavior?
Yeah, and so this is hotly contested in the research across the board. So genetics certainly plays a large role in helping determine who you are, but it's not the final say, right? We know the nature versus nurture discussions that we had in high school or college biology, that your environment, the situations you place yourself in, your parents, and so on, play a huge role in shaping who you are as a person. So in many ways, a lot of the Silicon Valley elites who are using this technology are really genetic determinists. So they think that genetics are the main and primary driver of who you are, which a lot of people would contest. And beyond that, there's a lot of questions about whether this technology can even deliver on what it promises. How do we actually know this embryo was the nicest embryo out of all of the embryos? So it goes from there. But you're absolutely right that this is quickly moved into ethical territory that I think it can be really summarized as nothing other than consumer eugenics, which is this profit-driven model allowing parents to practice what I would call a modern day form of eugenics, where you're not accepting the children you're given as a gift, but you're actually picking and choosing winners and losers based on these attributes. And this is where I think a lot of the folks in the genetic screening space become really slippery, is they present it as choosing the healthiest embryo for your family, which is what every parent wants, right? Like, what parent doesn't want a healthy child? But rather than actually healing or treating the embryos that you have, what you're actually doing is you're picking some embryos and then you're outright destroying other human embryos. So if your embryo shows that it may develop a heart defect over time, this screening isn't screening the embryo in order to treat it and heal it like you would in a cancer screening situation. It's simply screening it and saying, hey, it may not be worth even using this embryo. You might be better just destroying it. And if this sounds hypothetical or a little extreme, there are actually couples who have openly tweeted that they used Orchid's service in order to screen for a child or for an embryo that was potentially deaf. So they destroyed that embryo because they may be deaf, instead of waiting until the child was born and using many of the medical innovations we have to actually heal deafness in our culture today. So this is just incredibly barbaric. In the name of helping your child, right? I think a lot of people are being persuaded just to outright destroy their human embryos. And beyond this, it really gets into a bigger question of what's the impact on medical innovation, right? We know that oftentimes scientists develop technologies, they develop new treatments for people based on need. But if we have a culture that increasingly encourages people to screen embryos before they're even born, then what about people who do develop these conditions later in life? Will we even have the medical innovation necessary to actually treat them? Or are we just going to view it as sort of an extension of the assisted suicide? Well, it's probably better never to exist than to exist with suffering.
There's so much I want to dive into there, but I would also like to point out people are freaking out right now over an American Eagle ad about good genes. And meanwhile, you've got this going on. Like, please leave Sydney Sweeney alone. She's just wearing denim. Maybe pay more attention to this, because you're going to have people picking and choosing the kind of traits that they want in their children and essentially killing off embryos, which are children, in order to create a more perfect family. And there's a lot here. Once you open up this Pandora's box, it's just never going to end. And that's similar with AI. Like, once you open that box, you're just never going to put that genie back in its bottle. But what I'm thinking here too is that as this advances, you're going to have people that are like, I'm not going to get pregnant the old fashioned way and have kids by chance, out of this whole traditional thing called love and nature. And what I'm going to do instead, even if I don't have fertility problems, is I'm going to make a baby in a test tube and then pick out the traits that I want. And when you say designer baby, that's exactly what this is. And I'm envisioning like a caste system, to your earlier point about, these babies that were created with this designer technology, and then just the good old babies who were just born what we consider to be the traditional and normal way. And I see there being a huge problem here, and a huge problem in society if this gets out of control. But is there any way to keep it from going out of control? Because you give people this and you give them that temptation of, well, you could make your baby a little better. I don't know. I think a lot of people would say it makes them feel icky, but would they do it? Probably.
Yeah, and that's where this conversation gets so incredibly complicated because it quickly moves from hypothetical questions of what's morally ethical to a very practical question of what's best for your child. And for better and for worse, parents will stop at nothing to provide their children with their child really with the absolute best life. And so I think that's again where it becomes so important to recenter the conversation around the fact that this isn't just improving the well-being of one child, right? It's not actually editing the embryo to heal it from a disease, but it's just outright screening your embryos where certain ones are destroyed and other ones are kept. And so, sure, maybe the child that you chose lives a great life, but what happens to all the siblings that child never gets to meet? How many of them remain frozen for decades on end, or how many of them are just destroyed outright? But you're right that it's getting incredibly complicated where you're now having companies actually use AI to screen embryos. So it's not even humans screening the embryos, but it's actually an artificial intelligence system who's actually analyzing and choosing which human embryos get to be born. And I don't know about you, but it just gives me the ick when I think about this AI machine actually choosing which humans have the chance at life and which humans don't. I mean, it's literally an algorithm choosing future children. And Nord Siddiqui, who is the founder of Orchid, she's frequently said that sex is for fun and Orchid is for baby making. This idea that you can still have pleasure having sex, but when you actually want to have a baby, that you should rely on technology as the solution to move beyond what we've had to really pick very particular traits about your child. And while I think that's on its face value really appealing to some parents, I do think that we're going to hit a point where we see a pretty heavy backlash to this. So I don't know if you're familiar with the 1997 movie Gattaca, but the entire premise of the movie is that you have the elite class of people who are genetically designed and selected and born, and then you have those who were born naturally. And they have, at the moment they're born, this chart reads off all their health risks, all their health scores, their expected likelihood of how long they're going to live throughout time. And if you haven't been designed and chosen, you get these sort of subservient second-class jobs. And the whole movie is about this individual who really defies those expectations and is able to lead and fulfill his dreams despite that, right? But he's having to fight this system that views him as a second-class citizen from the beginning. And I think ultimately Americans especially love this idea of the underdog who rises up against all expectations and isn't being limited in society's eyes based on his genetics or where he was born or who his parents are. And so I do think that there's some cultural strength that will push back against this over time, especially as we have more studies come out and potentially show that this technology isn't even able to deliver on what it promises. What happens when parents find out that the human embryos they destroyed may have been perfectly healthy and it was just a faulty test? Those are going to be really heartbreaking moments that already happen in IVF. It already happens in abortion now, but will be taken to a whole new level as parents are using this technology.
Well, and this is just me speaking personally and very candidly. I also just have a lot of concerns about the number of embryos that are sitting in freezers for decades. I just saw something the other day, like a 30-year-old embryo was just born. It should be my age, but instead it's, 0. Because they kept it in a freezer that long. I got a lot of questions about that anyway. I don't know what, the use by date is on frozen humans, but I would be like, I don't know. For me, it's like, I don't know if I want to unthaw something that's supposed to be 30. It seems like a lot of issues that are going to happen that probably should have never happened. It's like, I think this was done out of compassion. The IVF, people have infertility issues. They want to make sure people can have a family, and that's great and that's beautiful. And then you go to this, like, let's just freeze a bunch of things and we'll decide later, like, which one we want to pick out of the freezer. I'm just saying, a lot of it feels real icky to me. But there's another path this could go down that I want to discuss with you. And this is even weirder and more scientific, and I even understand this even less. But it's this in vitro, I don't even know how to pronounce it, but it's where possibly same-sex couples could just generate this this embryo out of nowhere, meaning that not only would you not need like an egg donor or a sperm donor, but you could just use what's available and you could just create something. You could even do it 3 ways. Like this sounds like a nightmare. Please tell me how this is going to unravel.
Yes. So what you're talking about here is in vitro gametogenesis, or IVG for short, because no one wants to have to say the full name. And so what this does is it relies on stem cell modification technology that we have to take the DNA, so take a skin cell or part of your hair or some of your saliva. And researchers are actually able to genetically transform or change that DNA from typical skin cell DNA into a viable egg or sperm. So women naturally produce eggs, men naturally produce sperm, but they're currently testing and have succeeded in mice in actually modifying just your regular genetic DNA into viable gametes so that you can have a child. And so Japan has really pioneered this technology. And so they've actually succeeded in taking cells from the tail of a mouse, genetically transforming it into a viable egg or sperm, fertilizing it with another mouse's egg or sperm, and then creating little mouse embryos that they implanted and successfully bore multiple generations of mice. So not hypothetical, totally successful on rodents. So Japan and bioconceptions are now trying to do this with human DNA. And so you're totally right that because it doesn't matter if you're a male or a female, you could take my DNA, for example, genetically modify it into a viable sperm, even though I'm a biological female, and then my sperm modified from my DNA could fertilize an egg that came from my body. And so it would
it's like
require
immaculate conception, kind of.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yes, it would be a cloning of myself. So it would be that child, that embryo would be full, like 100% genetically related to me. And so similarly, you could do that with a same-sex couple. So you take the sperm from one man, and then the other man, you modify his DNA into a viable egg, and then you fertilize it so that two men can be the full biological parents of a child. So instead of having to rely on an egg donor who's not related to both people in that relationship, it would be fully related. And of course, for many people, this sounds like the best sympathetic result, right? We already have movements to allow parent number one and parent number two on a birth certificate so that same-sex parents can be the legal parents of a child. We have efforts to redefine infertility to include same-sex couples. Even though same-sex couples can't conceive a child, they're missing a key part of the equation. And now this technology would take what's legally already allowed and make it biologically available. And it would it would be an understatement to say it completely defies our concept and understanding of man-woman marriage relationship and childbearing, where children are born into the world with their biological mother and their biological father, where they're set up to thrive best. And so it really is the definition of depriving a child at birth from either a mother or a father who can raise them and care for them and protect them in a way that only a mother or a father can.
Yeah, and not only that, I just see some problems down the road, like, when they have cases of incest or people that are marrying their cousins and they have a kid and, not working out too good. This sounds like this could spin out of control here. This sounds like that on steroids. It sounds like we're going to be in a culture of the hills have eyes.
Yeah, well, I mean, take you, Tomi. You're incredibly attractive. Your fans love you. What happens if you're at a meet and greet and one of your fans reaches over, gives you a hug, and grabs a little bit of your hair at the same time? You probably wouldn't feel it. You wouldn't notice it in the busyness of it, but they could take that hair follicle, and when the technology actually gets there, because we haven't successfully done it with humans yet, they could take your hair follicle, genetically modify it into egg, for example, and someone could conceive a child using IVF that was biologically related to you without you ever knowing that it had happened. And that's the level of insanity. So Leonardo DiCaprio goes to a hotel and the maid is like, I've always wanted a child with Leo. I guess I'll just grab his leftover DNA, right? A little bit of saliva left in his cup. And with enough money, and when the technology gets there, they could then have a child that was Leonardo DiCaprio's with his DNA, his genetics, his good looks. And that's the level of insanity that we're talking, where it's not just, oh, I may have kids I didn't know about from a relationship, but I could have kids I didn't know about with someone I've never even met before.
That's disgusting. I'd also like to say, if they tried to do that to me, joke's on them, because this isn't all my hair. So it's probably someone from Russia you've never met. okay, that worked very hard to give me these extensions. Shout out to them wherever they are. But yeah, I could see this being problematic for a number of reasons. I don't like any of it. I don't think that you're going to ever be able to stop it. And I think it's going to spin out of control. And it sounds like a science fiction movie. And I'm really concerned now. Can you say anything to calm our nerves? Maybe anything, like any caveat to this that might slow the progression or anything that might stop people from going down this path?
Yeah. So first, human genetics are incredibly complicated. They have not successfully done this with human DNA yet. Some claim that we're 5 to 10 years away from seeing it, but until it happens, I'll be incredibly skeptical. And even if we do it once, it doesn't mean that it will be sustainable or a good outcome. So Mother Nature and technology itself could simply fail to achieve this goal. But I think beyond that, you're seeing a really exciting movement in culture to really reaffirm the importance of mothers and fathers in a child's life. And time again, we're seeing the wounds and the hurt that come when children are raised apart from that relationship, whatever the situation may be. And so I think you're going to see a number of people who are really fighting to protect the well-being of children, to protect biological parenthood in our society. It really is an essential cornerstone of who we are, recognizing that so many of the perversions in our society, from transgenderism to the harms born of children in these advanced technologies, are really encouraged and perpetuated when we allow technology to rule parenthood and conception rather than us ruling over it ourselves. So there's that. And then two, I think there's always the room for state and federal legislation to protect the well-being of parents. And so while we don't currently have legislation that's been enacted, I think you are going to start seeing states and even federal agencies think through what it means to protect procreation in the United States. So I don't know if you followed recently in California, there was a couple who used surrogacy to have 21 children. And most of those children were under the age of 5, which meant they had multiple surrogates who had used IVF and had babies at the same time. And lo and behold, they found that of the nannies who were watching them, these unrelated women, many of them were physically and even verbally abusing the children. And of course, this is an outlier. This isn't commonly what happens in surrogacy, but you're starting to see more and more examples where people are abusing these advanced technologies. You had the case in Pennsylvania where a confirmed sex offender, and I think pedophile in his case, had used surrogacy to have a child, even though most adoption clinics would have outright rejected him as unfit for being a parent. And so I think those stories are already starting to cause people to rethink the technologies that we use. And just because we can do something right doesn't mean that we should do something. And hopefully that line of thinking, especially with the unfortunate cases of abuse and misuse that we're seeing with these technologies, will cause us to rethink things, even like IVG, that are coming down the road.
Yeah, a healthy sense of societal shame, I guess, can go a long way. So maybe we just need a little bit more of that. You've terrified me, but you've enlightened me. Now I know so much more, and I can't wait to whip out this information at my next social gathering, because people are going to be horrified, but I'm going to have all the information. Thank you so much, and please do whatever you can do to stop this. The country and the world will thank you.
We're on it. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Joining me now to further dive into the designer babies epidemic he's got a very illustrious title, National Catholic Bioethics Center Senior Ethicist, Father Tad Pacholczyk. Father Tad, I'm so grateful to have you. And this is such an interesting topic and discussion. It came onto my radar because I saw a report on this on America Reports, and I think that they actually quoted you as having some concerns about all of this. But, you know, in essence, what this is designer babies, but maybe designer babies to a level that we've never seen before. This whole designer baby craze, it's been a thing for probably a decade, but the territory that we're wandering into now with this incredible cherry picking of genes and attributes and traits with these embryos, it's got me a little concerned, Father Tad.
Yeah, well, thanks first for having me on your show. Great to make your acquaintance and to be able to join you. I'm totally with you. I mean, I think this is a technology that really raises a number of concerns from a number of angles. I mean, first, it's a technology that's pretty darn new. It's not well tested. It's not well vetted. It's offering certain claims about outcomes that have not been more broadly verified just scientifically. When you talk about predicting characteristics that your children will have in the future, This is a little bit dicey. It's, a polygenic scoring, they call it. Polygenic just means a lot of genes are contributing to this, and they're making inferences and guesses about what might be the case for your baby, 20, 30, 40 years down the road in terms of heart disease or breast cancer or inflammatory bowel disease or whatever the case is. So, these things have not been verified. And I would say because these are being driven through market economy kinds of considerations, companies that are looking to do well as startups, they're offering some very, very broad brush promises. And I think we have to have just first, a dose of even scientific skepticism regarding the types of claims that are being made for customers who buy into the project of screening their embryos.
Yeah, and to me, it's the moral calculation here because what this really sounds like to me, it's like going to a fortune teller and they predict your future and then you base your life on that fortune teller's prediction. That's what this is, but you're not just basing your own life, you're basing somebody else's life, an entire child. And you're picking and you're choosing, or at least you think you're picking and you're choosing. And whether this is incredibly accurate or not, I think is actually beside the point. To me, it's just, it causes such a moral dilemma and a moral and societal risk here. And I'm wondering from even the religious perspective, every parent wants what's best for their child, but this feels a lot to me like playing God, maybe on a level we've never seen before.
Yeah, I mean, the root issue here, if we shift gears away from the scientific and into the moral and ethical, is that what you're basically doing is you're making a lineup of all your kids, maybe 10, maybe 15, depending how successful the superovulatory step is, where they acquire the eggs from the woman and fertilize all of them. You want to get as many as you can. And then you just start asking questions about each of your embryonic kids who are there vulnerable in the petri dish. Does this one have a propensity for this disease? Does that one have another propensity for that disease? And you just go through the whole lineup and you say, all right, the one that looks like it has the least risk of anything developing is number 8 out of number 15. The rest of the guys, we're just going to have to freeze them, put them in the deep freeze. They'll kind of be locked in stasis for, years, decades, who knows how long. Maybe they'll eventually, like in some countries, in Great Britain, they used to have a law that you could only keep embryos on ice for 5 years, and then you were required by law to destroy them. So you're making a whole bunch of your kids and you're doing this selective step, which is a form of eugenics. So this is highly morally problematic. It raises, severe concerns about what is proper parental prerogative. In other words, what does it mean to be a parent? Should a parent be choosing which of their children, their 15, should be the lone survivor, let's say? And this is clearly outside the domain of what parents are called to do. Really, the beauty of marital sexuality is that it's a surrender of one spouse to the other and an openness to receiving a gift. And you don't know what that gift is going to look like because it's coming from one greater than you. So that openness is being sidelined here in the interests of turning this into a kind of spreadsheet exercise where techies and people who are from Silicon Valley can pay to have this done and exercise a kind of command and control mentality over the future children that they hope to see come to the threshold of birth.
Yeah, I mean, you really nailed it there. It's just taking what we would assume would be a very natural, beautiful thing of life and making it into a science lab experiment. And I have a lot of issues anyway when you mention, well, you take your 15 kids and then you choose, which one in a petri dish. That even right there to me, and this is just me personally, that even to me just seems a little questionable. I don't know if we've gone too far just in society with science, with the whole embryo thing and the surrogacy thing. And it seems like what was intended to be for people who are infertile or experiencing real issues has become just the way to go about it, not because you have infertility issues, but because you want to pick the best and the brightest. And it seems like you're really taking God, and this whole notion of biology out of the equation. Are you concerned that even where it is now, that maybe 5-10 years from now, this is going to be the norm?
Well, that's certainly what the founders of these companies are claiming. They're saying, um, for example, one of them said, sex is for fun, embryo screening is for babies. So, they're pushing very hard in that direction to say that they want to see all of human reproduction retooled and recast in this direction. And I think that's something we should be actively pushing back against. And part of the way that I think they're hoping that this will take off, I mean, this is basically, a proposition that the consumer is always right. Whatever the consumer wants, the consumer should get. And I think that's a flawed assumption. And they're trying to also push, I suspect, in the background that one day this will get insurance coverage, much as has happened for in vitro fertilization itself. That technology, raises a number of moral concerns, and yet it seems to have become more and more mainstreamed with less and less ethical reflection. So yes, I am very much concerned that these new technologies for embryo screening, they're becoming quickly allied, if you will, with the entire infertility industry, which is pushing in vitro fertilization together with these added packages or options that consumers can plug into.
Yeah, it shouldn't be like buying a car. I mean, my goodness. Father, I'm very concerned about all of this. I think that this is just going to go way haywire and it's going to go way left. We used to worry about cloning, and it was like, if we get this cloning technology, are we going to run rampant with that? But to me, this is actually worse. And this is going to cause a huge dilemma. And, it puts these parents in an interesting predicament, because you never think that you'd want to do this, but then kind of in the back of your mind, you're like, but if I can, should I do it? Because, you want what's best and you want your kid to be the best and the brightest and the smartest. But then, I discussed this as well with another expert. But to me, this is also setting up like our class system in society. If this really takes shape and this becomes a prevalent means of conception, I feel like you're going to have like the traditionally born kids, and then you're going to have these supersonic robot kids that were picked out of a lineup. And I think society would really suffer if that were the case.
Yeah, Tommy, I think you're spot on with that. You mentioned the cloning at the beginning, and I think it's a good parallel. In the days when we were debating human cloning, I mean, we still are debating it on some levels of society. But I remember saying to people, look, what if you paid to clone, say, a super famous basketball player? You got his permission. He gave you a sample of his skin cells. You did the cloning. You got the baby grows up, and you say to the kid, as the kid is growing up, look, I cloned a basketball superstar. You have got to love basketball, and you yourself have to be a champion. Think of the weight of expectations that are being put onto a child like that. How unfair that is in a certain sense. What if the child has no interest in basketball? He just wants to play the piano, or do something else. This same issue arises when you screen your embryo for all kinds of features and you attempt to impose various desired characteristics that you expect with greater probability to appear in your child. And then you expect him or her to behave a certain way, to pursue certain interests, and that may not be the case. So there is something unfair here about this that, we need to be sort of bringing it to the light and not allowing this to become a kind of parents dominate everything. Whatever mom and dad want, mom and dad should get. Because I think that's the attitude that these fertility clinics have basically adopted. And there needs to be pushback, and we need to say, look, the child is actually the most important part of this equation. The child is the most vulnerable, most in need of protection, has this sacred right to life, should not be instrumentalized, should not be turned into a commodity, should not be handled through market economics, et cetera, et cetera. So, once we step back to that foundational level and we understand that our children are gifts and not a right that we can lay claim to, not property to be managed along with our other assets, suddenly the world looks very different. And I think it's a different journey that we make as parents receiving the gift of life. And we grow differently. In other words, it's not just command and control, I get what I want, but it's like, oh, maybe my child will have some difficulty, maybe a disability. And what are the designs of God over that? What is it that I am meant to learn through this? There are valuable, invaluable lessons that await us around these corners, but we're driven so much by our own fears. We let the fears take over, and then we end up derailing the whole thing in these disastrous directions.
Not even just fear, but vanity. I feel like a lot of this is vanity. And I think this just goes hand in hand with societal problems that we already have about keeping up appearances for social media. And this, to me, just goes right along with that. It's like people want to show off for others and they want the validation from others. And it's become more about that than it is personal. It's not only accomplishment, not only personal validation, personal assurance, but it's just become a completely vain society. We have declining birth rates in this country. Everybody knows it. It's a problem. The president wants to address it. And he believes, expanding IVF might be part of the solution to that, among other things. But from your perspective and from the faith perspective as well, what do you think the answer is to these declining birth rates? How do we more morally address that?
Well, I think there are many other steps that can be taken to encourage young people to look at the beautiful invitation to be open to a family. And I think, our society it's a pretty affluent society. Let's face that fact. And I think because of that, we can take steps like providing greater support for, situations that are going to be conducive to becoming pregnant, to raising children, making sure that, good schooling is available. A lot of people are saying, well, maybe we should just, strengthen daycare type things. I'm not sure that's the direction we want to go, because that introduces a kind of division between parents and children, where the children are not, given the full attention and upbringing and raising by the parents, but rather by surrogates, by others who step in on their behalf. And I think that's probably in the long run not fully desirable. But to round out your question, I think that there are other approaches here that we can take and to provide supports, which is what young people, I think, are looking for. They're a little bit afraid. We need to reassure them and take measures that will enable them to say, yeah, we can go forward, we can be courageous here, we can be generous, we can have several children, and not sort of foreclose on that option out of an inordinate amount of fear, which I really do think that's part of it. And, I do think there's going to have to be some sort of looking at re-examining of gender roles. I know this isn't popular these days to say this kind of thing, but I'm convinced that the understandings of the roles of men and women, and specifically in marriage and in raising children, that we've changed that. We've really changed it in recent decades in such a way that the message that many young women get is, career first, make a direction of your own. If time is left over at the end and you want to have kids, maybe you can have 1 or 1.5, children, as the statistics, call it. Et cetera. And I think we've got to pull back on that and say, wait, is this really the path to happiness for women here? And that's a question, that's not popular, not well engaged, I don't think. It's tacitly assumed that that's the natural order of things, but it's actually a very new, recent on the scene kind of development. So I think addressing all of those different levels can shift our emphasis and provide us with a new openness. I also think, you ask about religion and its input here, a sense that, look, isn't it the Lord God who's the giver of life? Isn't he the source of all life? And doesn't he have a beautiful and sacred plan for each of our marriages? And we're not open to that many times. It's like, no, this is my project. I want to get married. I want one boy. I want one girl. End of story. And it's like, well, is it the end of the story? What about, where does the Lord fit in here?
Yeah.
He may want more than that. He may have a completely different plan than what you are writing up here. So I think those are all different levels on which we need to approach this. I don't agree with the approach of the Trump administration sanctioning and promoting and potentially even paying for and encouraging in vitro fertilization, because what that means practically is that my tax money and the tax money of others who object will be taken and funneled into a morally concerning and morally objectionable direction. So we need to be very careful. Our healthcare should be focused on healthcare. If there are issues of infertility, then it's important to address those underlying issues. And that can very effectively be done if there's a blocked fallopian tube, if the woman isn't cycling right, if the man has low sperm count. There are many different avenues here that should be pursued first. But in our society, the default position has become IVF. The big industry, the multi-billion-dollar industry, is ruling here and controlling the equation.
You're exactly right about that. I mean, especially for my generation, that seems to be more the norm. Like, you would often have friends that did IVF, or you'd hear of people doing IVF, and now it's so prevalent that it's like everybody has done it. And I don't even know if people have necessarily fertility issues. I feel like some people do it because they want an instant result, and we've become a society of that. But there are certainly moral things that we need to take into consideration. We want everybody to experience that, and I'm not downplaying or taking away from people who want families that are physically or biologically unable to do that. I'm not taking away from that dream, but I just think that this can unravel very quickly. So I'm glad that we've got a lot of perspectives on it, and that people are becoming aware of another side to the technological advancement that might not be the answer. So, Father, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate all of your insight. It's definitely giving us all something to chew on.
Well, thanks so much, Tomi. Really a pleasure to join you.
Thank you so much. God bless.
God, you too.
All right, folks, I hope you learned a ton in this episode. I certainly did. Technology is great. Family's great. Should we combine them? I don't know. That's up for you to decide. But that does it for this special episode of Tomi Lahren is Fearless. Catch full episodes on Outkick, Fox Nation. Please like and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Tomi Lahren is Fearless. From Nashville, God bless and take care. Hey, thanks for watching. For more of my hottest takes, must-see conversations, and of course, my final thoughts, click right here. And don't forget to subscribe. Just click right here so you never miss a beat. I will be here every weekday, and I hope you'll join me.